Okay, for more on this, we're joined by our MPs. Two of the three probably look a little familiar to you. You just saw them in the clips. But Conservative MP Erin OToole is the one you didn't see. NDP Deputy Leader Megan Leslie and Liberal Deputy Leader Ralph Goodale. All right, let's keep in mind this is one side of the story. This is Mike Duffy's side of the story. There's only three sort of scenarios here that I'm wondering which one you think it is. Is this a cover-up, a conspiracy, or Mike Duffy's having a big dose of sour grapes and making things up? Megan, over to you first.
This smells like a cover-up to me. I mean, first of all, you say it is Mike Duffy's story, but, you know, his lawyer was there with documents, and he's ready to actually table those documents.
I wish you'd have showed him today.
I wish he had too. So he has documents. He's not saying, and Mike Duffy told me, right? Like, this is real. But also sort of cross that with what we know from the RCMP investigation. There is a criminal investigation going on here, and we know from what the RCMP has said that the Prime Minister's office was involved. It wasn't Nigel Wright alone. There were other people in the room who knew about it. Nigel Wright had a binder full of information. That totally overlays with what it is that Duffy's lawyer is saying today. There is something going on here. It's not just about Mike Duffy. It's about the Prime Minister's office and the Prime Minister.
Okay, Ralph Goodale's leaning in here. I'll get your quick thoughts before I go to you, Erin. I'm sure you have a different view. What's your take on what's going on here?
Well, who knows, because the Prime Minister won't answer any questions. Despite what he said in the clip, he has not answered any substantive questions about what went on and what his role was, what was the role of his office. The police have said that there were at least 3 senior PMO staffers that were fully in the know, in addition to Mr. Wright. They have said that there is hundreds of pages of emails and a massive binder full of documentation that directly contradicts what the Prime Minister has said in the House of Commons. And until we get accountability from the Prime Minister, this scandal is just going to grow and grow and get worse and worse. He's the only one who can look Canadians in the eye and tell them exactly what went on and assume a little contrition and a little responsibility for a massive mess.
I thought he looked Canadians in the eye and said it's all Nigel Wright's responsibility. Yeah. What's your take?
They don't believe that in Brandon.
Don, I think what we saw this week is the latest development, and that's the new government leader in the House has set a very clear tone. He's new to the office, and he's set a zero tolerance. So there's the suspension that he talked about last week, and I think that led to, you know, these developments today. Those, I will remind you, are about the third step. So Mr. Wright is gone. The senators with the problems are no longer part of the caucus. We've called in the Auditor General. There's been a fully sharing of all information, as the Prime Minister said, has been turned over. These things have all been repeated several times in the House. They keep asking the same questions. They're going to get those answers. There's been zero tolerance from the start. We continue to show that to Canadians. And really, the opposition doesn't want to turn the page because they don't want to reluctantly praise a huge trade deal that was announced on Friday that will change the country.
But Erin, the thing that confuses me is you've got this. Nigel Wright was originally a lone man on this thing, and then suddenly we're hearing from the RCMP there were staff involved, and then the binder that Ralph's referring to shows up. It seems to me that you're seeing more and more building up into the PMO every time. Why doesn't he just say, here's exactly what everyone knows in the PMO?
I think what we know is that Mr. Wright accepted sole responsibility for it when he informed the Prime Minister of it. That was shortly thereafter he resigned. He has taken accountability, and for what I understand, he has turned over all his information as part of the investigation. Then if you look at the senators involved, you know, I know the Liberal senator resigned on his own accord, but the 3 senators that did sit with our caucus are no longer with our caucus. Called in the Auditor General to look at this in quite detail. And now the new government leader in the Senate is sending an even swifter signal to say there will be suspensions of pay and the privileges around office, you know, in terms of staff and that sort of thing. There's really zero tolerance to any of these things within our caucus.
Megan, if the Prime Minister's office did this scripting of the media lines and said, here's a check from Nigel Wright, how damaging is that? I mean, they're just trying to get a rogue senator out of their hair. I'm just playing devil's advocate.
No, it's incredibly damaging. And so I'm going to tie that to something Erin said, talking about the 3 senators that have had their problems and they're gone now.
Right.
That's incredibly offensive because the Prime Minister, out of all the Canadians in Canada handpicked these people to be senators. Not everybody gets to be a senator. He picked them for a reason. He picked them to do partisan work, to go out there and do the fundraisers and raise money for the party. And this is who he picked. He wears this. So how damaging is this? He picked those three. It doesn't matter what happens in Alberta.
Picked elected senators.
He picked Mike Duffy and Pamela Wallin.
NDP provincial government in Nova Scotia that was just replaced. I wonder if my friend Megan didn't urge the Premier of Nova Scotia to hold provincial elections for the Senate, like Alberta. The Prime Minister has appointed elected senators.
Legitimize the imbalance
that
against
is
Western Canada. The point here is that these are the Prime Minister's responsibilities. This issue isn't primarily about Mike Duffy or Nigel Wright. This issue is about Stephen Harper, the people he appointed, and what has happened on his watch as Prime Minister of Canada. And it doesn't do for him to go to Peru, as he did in the spring, hold a long-distance news conference and said, I'm not going to answer any questions. Well, that doesn't wash with people like those who are going to vote in Brandon and Provencher and Toronto Centre and Bourassa. The Prime Minister's credibility is in the tank on this issue. And unless and until he looks Canadians in the eye and answers the questions they've been asking, this stench is going to continue to hang in the air.
When Mr. Trudeau goes out to Western Canada, he says one message, and then when he's in Quebec, there's another message. He wants the status quo in the Senate. He said that repeatedly. We've said from before
it's not about the
spending
Senate.
issues
it's
came
about
to
the Prime Minister's
we
office.
want reform in the Senate. We had a bill, as you know, in Parliament before these issues came up. It's now before the Supreme Court of Canada. I hope both parties intervene at the Supreme Court, both my opposition friends, to say, yeah, we would like to reform this upper house.
Speaking of, your party's got a motion tomorrow in the House of Commons talking about eliminating senators from any partisan activity. What do you mean by that?
Well, people, when I talk to them on the streets and they say, well, you know, maybe there's a role for the Senate here, this idea of the sober second thought. Well, where we are with the Senate is not that. Where we are with the Senate is these folks go around and they campaign, they raise money, they go to the fundraisers, they're out there, you know, waving the party flag. I mean, the Liberal Party director of campaigns is a senator. So we're paying for Senator Cowan to go and raise money and plan elections, and we're paying for that because he's a senator. We're paying for it with our taxpayers' dollars. That is such an abomination of what the Senate is supposed to be about. So take that partisan piece out.
Do you think that's a
What's the problem
legitimate
with
position,
that?
Erin? But
Don, we're committed to reform the institution. I think that's where most Canadians are. When I was in the military, during the Chrétien government, with fairness, when they were hollowing out the Canadian Forces, the only people speaking up for the Canadian Forces were Senator Forrestal, a Conservative, and Senator Kenney. I'll give him credit, a Liberal. That they used their roles to highlight underfunding of the forces, lack of equipment during the Liberal government. They can do a lot of great work.
They can. So
they also belong to parties.
Work.
They also belong to political parties. So you also have to recognize the reality of it. But we're saying the accountability will come with election and with term limits. Nobody should sit there for 40 years.
You're not going to support
Ralph, do you think they should be?
They're all going to be members of a caucus.
Well, I think you need to build in some distance in their function of the sober second thought house of a bicameral parliament, and in a great many ways they do that now. But the core issue here is not, with respect, is not reforming the Senate. The issue here is it credible that Stephen Harper's most senior entourage was intimately involved in this deal with respect to Duffy, and the Prime Minister for months and months and months didn't know? Canadians don't find that credible.
Neither of them will support nonpartisan senators because they benefit from it too much.
I wanted to make one last point because your leader made this point all last week, that Stephen Harper was taken off to go to summits all over the world and not showing up in the House to ask or answer questions. Neither one of your leaders were in the House today. His leader was. The Prime Minister showed up. Why weren't your leaders there?
My leader, quite frankly, was attending to some family business, some personal business with his son.
And my leader had a speaking engagement already set with several hundred QP members. So
you care to have a shot at that?
Yeah. Duffy's lawyer didn't give us a heads up.
I don't want to intrude on what Mr. Trudeau probably had. I don't know what it was.
Don,
but
I understand that. You would have thought they would have understood that the Prime Minister being in Brussels to sign the largest trade agreement in Canadian history. 80,000 net new jobs was just is a pretty good reason not to be in the House.
Coincidentally, on the day of the first question period.
We almost got through that whole thing without the European Union region.
Such a big deal, Don. We've got to talk more about it.
Hey, we will. Actually, if we hadn't had this Duffy thing blow up, we would have talked more about it. Erin OToole, Megan Leslie, Ralph Goodall, thanks very much.
Thank you.
Coming up, 9 charred tanker